Welcome to the webinar. You have entered as an organizer and may now speak to any other organizers or panelists on the line. When you are ready to begin the presentation, press the Start Broadcast button on the GoToWebinar control panel to allow all attendees to hear you. This system will notify you once you begin your broadcast.
This is Peter.
Oh. Hi.
Hi,
How's
everyone.
it going?
Hi.
Bye.
I'm sorry. I just had a conference call and then ran into living rooms and then just came back. 5 minutes late. Sorry about that.
No problem. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Do you see the full screen version or the presenter version?
The
I'm not
presenting
sure.
version.
Oh, okay. So I guess I need to change the...
Yeah, you should be able to switch it in display settings.
Yeah.
There
Is
we
it?
go.
Okay.
So I haven't started the broadcast yet because
Okay.
just want to make sure that we are testing everything is okay, and then by 2:30 I will just start broadcasting. Okay.
Okay. I think for me, you're like
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Can you take it back from me? Okay.
All right, Sirisha, kick us off, please.
Okay. Hello, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this session in Conversation with
Muted.
series hosted by the Transportation Research Board's Bicycle and Pedestrian Data Subcommittee. This conversation series is also supported by the Bicycle, Pedestrian, and the Travel Survey Methods Committee of TRB. These conversations are focused on bicycle and pedestrian traffic monitoring. Today's topic is, what do we do with our data now that we have it? Okay. My name is Sirisha Kothuri, and I am a researcher at Portland State University, and I also serve as the research co-chair for the Bicycle and Pedestrian Data Subcommittee that is sponsoring today's session, along with Kristen Nodback, and I will be moderating the session today. Today we have two speakers, both from Minnesota. Simon Blensky is a transportation planner from the city of Minneapolis, and Michael Pittish is the bike and pedestrian coordinator at Minnesota Department of Transportation. And both of them will share their agency's experiences with using count data. The aim for this series is to have a conversation about a topic, which today is focused on applications of count data. At the beginning, we will have a short presentation by Simon and Michael, following which we will open it up for discussion. The intent of this session is to foster a discussion among the speakers and attendees. We have a few guidelines for today's session on the screen today. We ask that if you have a question, you please type in the question in the chat pod or click the raise hand icon, and somebody will be able to unmute you to ask your question following the presentation. We also have a few people helping us with the session today. Nathan Hicks with CDM Smith and Peter Ohms from the Virginia Transportation Research Council will be helping us in the background. Professor Greg Lindsay from the University of Minnesota will be guiding the conversation following the presentation. If you're having audio issues or other technical problems, we ask that you please type that into the chat pod. Miley from TRB will be assisting with any technical issues that we may have today. With that, I would like to hand it over to Simon, who will walk us through the applications of count data in the city of Minneapolis.
Hi, thanks for having me. Just wanted to check that my screen is showing up okay.
Looks good to me.
Great. Well, again, thanks for having me. My name is Simon Blensky, and I'm a transportation planner with the City of Minneapolis in our Public Works Department. I'm going to walk through some examples of how we've used our bike and pedestrian count data to kind of tell some big picture stories, but also some make some project level decisions as well. Here's just a little bit more about me. You're welcome to contact me after today's webinar if you have any questions. But I started out in our traffic division in Public Works here, kind of working to develop our bike and pedestrian count program. But since then, I've moved over to our transportation planning division, where I've got the opportunity to work on a lot of both long-term planning projects, but also a lot of capital projects. So I really enjoyed kind of those opportunities to apply data and actually make decisions and tell stories. That's kind of my favorite part of my job. But getting into some of those examples, the first example here is we use bike and pedestrian data to really understand the city's biking and walking story. We've had a pretty robust non-motorized count program since about 2007. And we've consistently counted a number of what we call benchmark locations every year annually since 2007. So we have 11 plus years of data that we can look to. And just the simple, creating a simple graph like this allows us to tell a story that biking is increasing. We've seen a 53% increase since 2007. And walking is increasing, although a little bit slower. And this is good because we're making a lot of investments in biking and walking infrastructure and programs, and that as we're communicating back to decision makers and the public about these investments, we can kind of tell that big picture citywide story. We've also been able to tell a number of project success stories with the data we've collected. One project called the Dinkytown Greenway has really been kind of put together in a piecemeal approach. It's a rail to trail corridor, so I'm sure a lot of people are familiar that those types of projects are very long term and take a lot of dollars and a lot of willpower over many years. And we built this trail connection over many years through many pieces, and we've tracked the counts over that time too. So you can see early on, in 2007 to 2011, 2012, there's only really a small connection of that trail, small piece of that trail built, but we slowly added a connection to the east and we saw a slight uptick, but we really saw a big uptick and a sustained increase when we built a connection that goes directly into our downtown bike network, and we've seen both increases in biking and walking on the Dinkytown Greenway since that connection was completed. Sometimes we get really detailed with our bike count data, really to see how projects can influence and change behavior. So as part of our regular bike count program, we monitor where bicyclists are riding, whether they're in the roadway or on the sidewalk or an adjacent path. And this graph here is showing that at about 69 locations where we've counted before and after projects were installed, we've seen that the percentage of people riding on the sidewalk dramatically decreased in some situations where a dedicated bike lane was installed. So it's showing that prior to having a bike lane in place, people probably were not feeling very comfortable riding along the corridor and were sticking to sidewalks. But once space was provided for them, they felt more comfortable riding in the roadway because they had dedicated space to do so. So this has been really powerful as we've gone out on future projects to say that we're making the case really to increase people's comfort along corridors. Bike and pedestrian data has definitely been important to understanding safety issues across the city. So a few years back, we did a big analysis of bike motorist car crashes throughout the city, and it was important to map both the raw number of to map the raw number of crashes, but also to understand the crash rate. And as many folks know out there, that you can't calculate crash rate, which is oftentimes a better indicator of kind of the levels of safety across the city without actually having exposure data. And having robust count data across the city really allowed us to kind of see which corridors were elevated from a crash rate perspective to help focus some of our investments going forward for bike infrastructure. This is an example we've shown to a lot of people just because it's so simple. Our traffic division has actually used our bike and pedestrian count data to make traffic control decisions. And this is a very simple one because the data was so clear. The Midtown Greenway, which runs through South Minneapolis, is largely grade separated and doesn't really interact with a lot of cross streets, but there are a few streets along the corridor. Fifth Avenue is one of them. And previously we had the trail stopping and Fifth Avenue did not have to stop. But we heard a lot of complaints from people biking and walking along the trail, and also just did a lot of observations along at this intersection. We just saw that there were so many more people using the trail than traffic on Fifth Street. So we looked at the numbers of cars crossing and the number of people walking and biking on the trail, and just made the decision to actually flip the stop sign in favor of the trail. This next example is really to help make the case kind of similar to that traffic control example for new designs. This is a project I worked on just recently that just was completed, and it's on Hennepin Avenue in a pretty busy commercial area of Minneapolis, and it's a location where there's a signal spacing is just 1 block away. But we did see a lot of people crossing mid-block because there was a lot of commercial destinations on both sides of the street. And kind of the initial reaction from other public works staff here was that we've got a signal half a block away in either direction. Why should we provide another crossing here? But after doing counts, mid-block counts here, we showed that there really were a high volume of pedestrians crossing mid-block. And it wasn't just for 1 hour a day, it was sustained throughout much of the day. And that helped make the case for actually formalizing the mid-block crossing with the capital project that we were working on. We're doing a lot of work in Minneapolis trying to kind of better define a network of protected bikeways throughout the city, and downtown is one of the more challenging places to figure that out. And we've really looked to our bike count data to help inform where people actually want to go in downtown. And this is just one example of using our count data, we've identified 2 major corridors, Hennepin Avenue and 3rd Avenue, to be the primary north-south routes through downtown. And that's where we're actually installing protected bike lanes along those corridors. Other corridors are still important, but in terms of creating a high quality network, we're really focusing on those select corridors where demand is high. This next example is really just trying to understand what types of projects are most effective at achieving our policy goals. So in Minneapolis, we have pretty ambitious goals to increase our bicycle mode share from currently it's at about 4%. Our goal is to increase it over the next 10 years to 15%, and that is pretty ambitious, and we're trying to really make the most of limited resources. So this is an analysis that was done that shows that biking is increasing through much of the city, but it's only increasing at about 2.5% on streets where bike infrastructure is not in place. But where protected bike lanes and kind of really high quality bikeways are in place, we're seeing 8% annual growth. So that's showing that if we do focus on those higher quality types of bikeways, that we can see more growth and possibly more quickly achieve our policy goals. That previous analysis, and also the analysis on this page here, was done by one of our interns over the past year, Phil Longnecker. Just wanted to give a shout out to him. he looked at basically our 11 plus years of bike and pedestrian count data and really found some remarkable nuggets of information. And this is just a snapshot of one of his kind of data visualizations in a report he produced. He found drew a lot of good conclusions related to different street designs and also the built environment. So this is just one example where we found that biking and walking are much higher on streets that have wider sidewalks and narrower roadways. He also found a lot of conclusions related to higher biking and walking rates in locations with mixed use land uses and a number of other attributes. So just allows us to kind of tell the whole story of why biking and walking is important in our city, and also how just the built environment itself influences and is related to levels of biking and walking in the city. And without the data, we wouldn't be able to draw any of those conclusions, even though if they are pretty basic and kind of fundamental to planning, it's just really helpful to confirm those relationships locally. And then I'll just admit that data really helps get us headlines. We've had certainly some not so great articles written about transportation issues, specifically walking and biking in Minneapolis, but we do occasionally get some really good headlines, and that's often driven by data. And this is just one example of an article from a few years back that cited our bike count data and investments in protected bike lanes in the city. And just one last thing I'll note is that, you know, for about the past decade or so, we've really been just using an old school method of counting people walking and biking by hand, using volunteers, just using pen and paper. Not at a ton of locations, but we have certainly tried to cast our net as wide as we can. And all the data that I'm really showing you is, or all the stories I'm telling you today are really just using that old school methodology. But as our management in public works and decision makers kind of see these stories kind of come out and see all these decisions being made that are driven by data, it's actually allowed us to better make the case to shift to some more efficient ways to collect more data for more user types. As we think about more automated counts, we're shifting to an approach where we're actually able to collect automated counts for all user types at every signalized intersection on a rotating 3 to 4 year basis. So having good data definitely allows you to get more and better data in the future. I think that's what I got, but I'll, I guess, hand it back over and turn it over to Michael.
Thanks, Simon. That was great. Next up, we'll hear from Michael Patesh from MnDOT, who's going to be telling us about how MnDOT uses their count data.
Thank you. Everyone able to hear and see everything okay?
Yeah, I hear you and I see your screen.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for the invitation to speak. And as Simon was given excellent examples from the city of Minneapolis, I'm going to talk about the entire state. And again, I'm the bicycle and pedestrian data coordinator for this state of Minnesota. And I've been in the position for about 2.5 years. And with a planning background, and I got introduced to this through Greg Lindsay, actually, at the University of Minnesota, Humphrey School of Public Affairs, and just kind of grandfathered my way into the DOT here. So it's been very rewarding, and I think, well, the two main questions that Sirisha and others that invited me wanted to know was why and how. So that's what I'm going to talk about, both at a state level and then somewhat at a local level too, since we have a lot of partners all over the state. But why is MnDOT interested in collecting and counting data related to bicyclists and pedestrians? MnDOT, as an agency, has a 50-year vision to maximize the health of the people, the environment, and the economy. And so we see biking and walking as doing a part in all three of those. We also are part of a multi-state contingency towards zero deaths and want to make all of our roads safer for everyone. And we have projects and plans that have performance measures that we somewhat arbitrarily or sometimes with information in our back pocket we're able to establish. But if we don't have the ability to track where we're going, how do we know when we get there? And then we also have Complete Streets initiatives, again, rooted around safety and trying to provide accessibility for people within every community and allow them to get to where they need to go. And oftentimes that's through walking and biking because of a lot of different reasons. So I think Gil Penalosa puts it well. We don't build bridges because people are driving into rivers. We build bridges to connect people and places. And that's another big part of the data, another big supporting factor that the data provides is that we can say that there are indeed people here, there is a need, and when we combine other information like crash statistics and things, then we can realize that there's a risk to not providing facilities. And then I also wanted to give a shout out to all the other partners that we're working with across the entire state. So in addition to being the data coordinator for MnDOT, I'm also coordinating a very diverse task force to try and wrestle with a lot of different questions that we all collectively are having as to how do we, regardless of who collects information, use it, access it, how do we reduce redundancy or maximize our resources collectively. So there's a lot of other partners that I wanted to give a shout out to as well. So that's part of why MnDOT is interested. So why are locals interested? This is just from 2017, but based on the usages of portable counting equipment that locals used around the state, on the top of each table is D1, D2. That's just District 1 and District 2. There's 8 MnDOT districts. So we can see that depending on the district, there's a lot of different reasons why, but some of it is baseline data collection before and after projects or reconstructions, for planning reasons, just merely testing the equipment so then they know how to use it in the future. And we can also see that so this is eco-counter equipment if you're familiar with it. So the pyro is an infrared sensor, a heat detection sensor. Then we also have tube counters. And we can see that there's been a lot of total days of data collected around the state. So I mentioned a little bit about the technologies that we're using, the infrared sensor and the tube counting, but in addition to that, we at MnDOT are managing a statewide continuous counting program too. So we have 29 counters at 22 locations, 13 of which are on trail facilities, and then 9 are on roads. So that's either a wide shoulder or a bike lane or a protected bike lane. And the site selection has been it's been a huge joint effort. MnDOT purchased the equipment, reached out to locals, and they helped identify where they thought good locations would be. And then these continuous counting sites will provide us with some trends and the ability to create factors for expanding the short duration counts that the locals primarily do for us and for them too. And then it also fosters even more partnerships. So we've done cost sharing with the Department of Natural Resources, cities, counties, and a few other partners too, in order to get these in place all over the state. And these are the portable counters that I was talking about the locals using. And so we have 8 sets, 2 counters in each set, so 16 total counters. And they're placed all over the state and they're free to use. for collecting information for local needs, and then we at MnDOT also get the information too. Between 2016 and 2018, we've had 55 sites that were counted by locals, and so this allows us to expand our coverage, and also the data is public. And since 2013, if we wrap in the count sites that Greg Lindsay and I worked on and collected data at, and as well as Steve Hankey, who's now at the university or at Virginia Tech in Virginia, we in Minnesota have about 300 or more, I guess, short duration count sites all over the state. That is in addition to all the manual count sites that Simon was talking about. And there's lots of other cities that have been doing manual counts too, and some have actually included permanent sites too. So once we get these all mapped, which is it's on my to-do list, it'll be quite a wealth of information. So what are we finding so far? This is so I have a link to the recent report that I released, and I think it's on the last slide, but this table is within that report, and you can see these are just sites that counted pedestrians in 2017. So we have the total annual pedestrians, and then if you divide by 365, then you get the average annual daily pedestrians, just like we do with motor vehicle traffic. And then since Minnesota has cold winters and warm summers, we can further dissect the information and look at what is a typical winter average day versus an average day in a non-winter. And we can see non-winter days have about 2 to 3 times more people than winter days. We can also see, I think I mentioned, if not, the first permanent counters were installed in 2013, and the last complete year of data we have is in 2017. And in those years, we've installed new sites each year, and we've counted about 5 million people in that amount of time. And the 5 sites with the highest volumes are in Minneapolis, Duluth, St. Paul, Minneapolis, and St. Paul. So the most populous areas in some of the most populous areas in the state. And we also have other sites that are only counting a couple thousand people a year, because they're in much more rural locations, but it's still interesting information, and it's a very different type of landscape and land use than we have in the core Twin Cities. And then this graphic is also kind of building off of that winter and non-winter information that we are seeing. So red is pedestrians, blue is bikes, and you can see in the winter and shoulder months, pedestrian volumes are higher than bikes, but it flips in the summer. And again, you're just seeing that there's people biking and walking year-round regardless of weather. So it's people don't stop just because it gets cold. And then we also can look at daily information and look at the context in which the count was taken. So the one with the 3 big peaks, the yellow line, that is closely located to a school. So it well corresponds with school start and dismissal. And we can also see on the right side, we've heard stories about winter biking being the fastest growing, I guess, section or part of the bicycling community. And at 3 or I guess 4 sites, we can see that that's pretty much true. It is growing. The winter biking rate is growing. And then a few case studies from around the state. So in Mankato, the local Department of Health learned that Monks Avenue, which is a street that kind of bisects the Mankato State University from student housing and restaurants and things, they found out that it was going to be reconstructed. So they did 24 hours of manual counts and learned that there was about 1,100 people that had crossed. And were able to give that information to the city, and then got 3 mid-block crossings put into the project, similar to what it sounds like Simon is doing on Hennepin Avenue. And in Alexandria, they put in a demonstration, essentially a pilot protected bike lane that was connecting a popular trail into downtown, and collected information there and gave it to the project managers so that they had information before they actually built the, had an idea of what demand would be before they built the project. In St. Paul, over Interstate 94, there have been several reconstructions of pedestrian and bicycle bridges, and we counted on them before and after. We're still working on counting on the after, but that, yeah, that's a work in progress. And another instance is with video counting. So this is for a separate research project on rural pedestrian travel and behavior, but in Mille Lacs, a Native American community, kind of north central Minnesota, there's a one of our MnDOT roads bisects a community and splits housing and community center from casino and food and theater and work and jobs and things. And there's 2 crossing points across 169. One is on the south side, which is with a marked crosswalk and a signal intersection. And then the other one is kind of it's just a fairly unmarked hole in the fence. And we found that with about 2 weeks of video counting, that there were 4 people on average per day that were crossing at the marked crosswalk. There was 136 people crossing through the hole in the fence. So it's an obvious mismatch of intent in terms of both the construction and I guess the desire of moving people safely. So this is a photo collage of some of the people, or some of the crossings that we observed. We saw people on bikes. We saw a lady pushing a stroller. Saw people just kind of chilling in the median, and we also saw dogs using it on their own. So both of the sites are about 1/8 of a mile apart, but it's pretty obvious that people are not going to walk that extra 1/4 mile out of their way to get to where they need to go. Where people are like water, and we flow through the easiest path. So that's all I had, and I wanted to thank you again for the invitation. And this is a slight modification from the from the PowerPoint that I sent Sirisha and others. So hopefully I can send this one to them, and then they will make it available. This has if you click on the purple text, then it'll bring you to our webpage with a lot of other resources information. So that's all I have.
Thanks, Michael. That was great. So now I'm going to turn it over to Nathan, who is going to administer a poll. Basically, we want to ask you about how you're using your count data.
Great, thank you, Sirisha. So you all should be seeing a poll momentarily. Essentially, we are curious about what you all are doing with your data. So as that poll comes up, there's a few different responses: safety analyses, before and after analyses, behavioral, volume studies, etc. And so we're just going to give it a few seconds for everybody to go through an answer for how you have used the data before. And you can answer you should be able to answer with more than one result. And we'll just give it a few more seconds here as people continue to answer. Still some people voting. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it now. and share the results. So, as we can see here, a lot of the results are for what most people have used them are for volume studies and also for some project funding priorities, which is great. Also some safety and before and after analyses, and a few people answer for behavioral. So that's great to see some of the variety in how the data has been used. And also, one thing we shared with everybody in the registration email, and I believe, yes, we have also included it in the chat, is a link to a Google document where essentially we're also trying to collect results or where conditioned, or excuse me, other projects that people have used or where they have used the data. And basically we're hoping to collect a series of projects so that way people could go back and basically use it as a quick reference guide if they were curious about how people may have used a certain project before. And this is something that we hope that you can contribute to as well. And we will be also including a link to this on the subcommittee's website itself. And if you have any questions about that, either let us know in the chat pod or in the questions tab. And hopefully we can build an interesting repository of projects. And with that, I'm going to hide the results and I'm going to turn it back over to Sirisha.
Great, thanks, Nathan. If you have any questions for either Simon or Michael or any of the other attendees or would like to share your experience, please enter your question either in the chat pod or click on the hand icon and Peter will be able to unmute you. So first up, we have Greg Lindsay.
So Simon and Michael, thank you very much for your presentations. I know that you've been involved in quite a number of projects. Could you just give us a little bit more insight into issues that you may have encountered and you tried to build your count programs, and in particular, how your bosses who have to invest in them have viewed the value of the data that you've actually been able to produce? I mean, I think that both of you are in agencies where there are high priority on getting things done. Investment in additional data collection sometimes raises questions. Can you talk a little bit about the reactions that your agencies have had to producing data, and have these examples that you've shared with us been effective in increasing the commitments to actual data collection and evaluation?
This is Simon. Yeah, I can respond to that first. I guess first I'll say that at the project level, when we're making decisions about biking and walking and certain street design elements, simply having the data at the table is extremely valuable, even if the data itself isn't telling a story, a clear story, or it's still just good because on so many projects we have motor vehicle data, we have lots of motor vehicle data, and only until fairly recently, the past 5 or 10 years, has biking and walking data kind of had a space at the table, and that's just really changed the conversation and the dynamic around project level discussions. I think in a way where it's been an idea for a while to include design elements that are better for biking and walking, but having actual numbers kind of forces the whole project team to really more react to something very tangible, as opposed to just react to an idea or something that isn't measured. So that's been my experience at the project level. I think at the higher level, we have a capital improvement program, and every year we kind of update that and pick new projects to get in the queue. And we need to go to our city council and ask for funding. And I think being able to tell those longer term stories has been really valuable, that maybe on a project to project basis, there's not big, huge success stories that emerge, but we can see that, especially around our bike network, that as we've been investing in it over many years, we've seen a lot of growth, and that we're starting to achieve, or at least get closer to our policy goals. So it's important once you collect the data to kind of build in that feedback loop to actually tell the story and get it back to people who actually help make the decision and get funding in the first place.
Yeah, so Simon gave some very good examples of using the specific data that they have collected to inform policies and projects and plans, and I guess ultimately programs somewhat too. The state, MnDOT being larger, I'm at this point in time, I think a lot of the information that we are collecting is probably more useful for the locals at this point than it is MnDOT, at least on a short-term basis, because going back to what Simon was saying about decades of motor vehicle information and drawing trends and things from that, some of our permanent counters have only been installed for about a year, and the oldest ones have only been in the ground for 5 years. And so it's really 3 to 5 years that it takes in order to start establishing trends. However, my ultimate goal is to essentially figure out how to, or be able to extrapolate all the information so that we can click on any segment, any road segment in Minnesota's road network, and get a modal breakdown of number of people that you could expect to walk there, bike there, number of semis, cars, and all the other motorized stuff. And I think that would be extremely useful for a lot of projects and plans and things. We also are finding it useful in thinking about how do we do better crash analysis or risk analysis, or how do we assess safety for corridors, because if we don't know how many bicycle and pedestrian crashes there have been, or if we don't know what the expected volume is for bikes and pedestrians there, then we can't really, an analysis is not very useful or possible. And we also somewhat, I guess, couched our efforts to build out a biking and walking data collection network in research initially. So that was a very useful way of getting the program up and off the ground, teaming up with the University of Minnesota and Greg and others at the DNR and several different offices within MnDOT to get buy-in all around, but under the, for good or bad, under the guise of research. And then we've shown that the information has been useful to a lot of different parties all over the state, and now we have much more buy-in from my bosses, and then all the way up the chain too.
We have about 20 minutes, 15, 20 more. Are there any questions from the crowd?
Shane Sawyer has one. Shane, I've unmuted you if you want to ask yours out loud. I'll go ahead and ask Shane's. He's asking what is the shortest count duration you feel is useful and or applicable for a given site?
I guess so we loan out the portable counters, and we were essentially telling the borrowing parties that it should be, the shortest should be 9 days. So that's 1 day of installation, a complete week of counting, and then 1 day of breaking it down and returning it to the loaning party. And I don't know what Simon's is.
In Minneapolis, we typically only do 2-hour peak hour counts from 4 to 6 p.m. on weekdays. That allows us to kind of cast our net really wide and count a high number of locations. But we do have a few automated and permanent count locations that we've kind of established to help us factor those very short duration counts. So we do go very short with our counts, but it is kind of rooted in some permanent count locations. I will note that for some of the more project-specific evaluation and observations we do, that it's really site-specific. You know, if there's a school there, you want to make sure you're out during arrival and dismissal. If it's another type of land use, you just want to make sure you're actually there when you're getting representative behavior at the location.
And a similar question from Nate White was, in regards to hand count data, how long do volunteers count and are the results extrapolated? How do you incorporate the manual kinds of counts into the continuous or longer term data?
Yeah, so volunteers that we work with they're primarily focused on those 2-hour counts from 4 to 6 p.m. on weekdays. When we present that data and publish the data, we extrapolate it to a 24-hour estimate. And again, that's based on information from our permanent count sites and just other kind of best practices in extrapolation modeling from across the country. Certainly, we'd love to count a lot longer, but we're kind of more, our focus, at least in the past, has been more on quantity and getting data at a lot of locations.
All right, there's another question from Krista Norback. Krista, I'm going to unmute you and you can ask yours if you want to do that.
Oh, great. Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So my question was about the one of your last slides, Simon. You mentioned that you're using this new technology. The old one was just having volunteers out there doing manual counts, but now you've got this automated counting for bicyclists and pedestrians. Can you tell us more about that? Is it an in-house type technology where you have an algorithm, or are you getting that from a vendor?
Yeah, so we're still kind of early in the process of making the transition, but we are piloting a new program this year. We're working with a vendor right now called MyoVision. I know there's a few other larger cities throughout the country that are using this as well, but essentially it's a camera-based system where our own crews set up a camera at an intersection or a location, and the video that's recorded is then processed on the back end automatically, and turning movements for all motor vehicles are recorded, which also allows us to get volumes for motor vehicles, but it also is able to recognize and tabulate non-motorized users, pedestrians in the crosswalk, people biking on the sidewalk or in the roadway. Our goal is to deploy this at all signalized intersections throughout the city on a rotating basis, as well as some other kind of as-needed locations. We're in our first year of piloting it, just in our downtown area, but if it goes well, we would hopefully to deploy it citywide. It would give us, I I think 24-hour to 48-hour counts, so we kind of expand our current bike and pedestrian count data collection. But I think it's just a good sign that it's kind of this more integrated multimodal approach, as opposed to just, in the past, we only laid out tubes to count cars, and the bike ped program was just this little thing on the side. It's nice to see it all coming together into potentially one data set.
So as part of this pilot, are you going to do any validation of the bicycle and pedestrian counts?
We are, and the vendor itself, they do some validation. They manually tabulate, 1 hour for every, I forgot what the ratio is, but there is some processing or some manual processing on the back end to ensure that the counts, or at least we have an understanding of the accuracy, and there's some work being done internally on our end to help see if it's meeting our needs as well.
Great, thanks.
All right, Sarah, did that answer your question too?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to follow up on that. So you said that MyoVision gives you the counts, but they're also doing some sort of validation or audit, but you mentioned somehow you are internally working with them, and I'm just wondering what the level of objectivity is, or how you're working with them to ensure that what the error or the accuracy rate of their counts are. How do you determine that? I mean, do they give you the video for you to cross-check if you wanted to, or what?
We have another staff who's on point with them, and I'm happy to follow up and get some more kind of details on this. But I do know that it's standard for them to manually process a selection of the video for every full complete video session. They also do rate the quality of the video for every count that's done, and if it doesn't, due to shadows or other issues, they may actually scrap, or kind of invalidate that one video and recommend that it's redone. So the quality standards, at least coming from the vendor, are pretty high, but we're really using this first year to kind of understand what that accuracy is. And I don't know the details of our internal kind of validation, but I know that we are kind of looking to scrutinize, especially the biking and walking side of things in this first year, to make sure that it's actually working for us.
Thank you.
All right, Josh Roll has a question. I'm not able to unmute Josh, so I'll just read it out. It says, what keeps either the city or state efforts from developing system-level estimates of bike ped activity?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
I think it's sort of getting at barriers. What are the barriers to developing a system-level estimate or system-level estimates of bicycle pedestrian activity? Things I could think of might be not enough coverage across the state, maybe other issues to actually get a network level perspective. That's my understanding of the question.
Yeah. Another big part is knowing where all the origins and destinations are. I know Michael Lowry out in Idaho has been working on essentially this exact question with the state of Washington, and I'm hoping to tap his brain in the near future. But big part of his analysis is the origins and destinations. But then, yes, as you also said, just the geographic coverage and trying to identify the correct number of, to at least have a good understanding of all the factor groups within the area too. And so that will help you understand when people are traveling between sites too. That's what I can think of.
if you look at a select portion of your network, one that's maybe more contained, I think you can start getting some estimates. I know, Greg, if you're still on the line, I'm going to kind of speak to your basically bicycle miles traveled estimate for the Minneapolis Trail Network. Basically set up a number of automated counters around our trail network at different intervals, kind of looking at where different access points were, and basically modeled the whole trail network in Minneapolis. And I forgot what the number was, but I know it was definitely really astounding and really high of how many bicycle miles traveled occur on our trail network every year. So I mean, there's some ways to kind of get at it, but yeah, citywide it's pretty challenging.
Would you like me to chime in?
Yeah,
Sure.
Please speak to it more. Yeah.
So there's two approaches that people have used to try to get network-wide estimates of either flow, AADT, or miles traveled. And as Simon said, we did an experiment where we had 6 permanent counters on an 80-mile trail network and then sampled every mile of trail. Steve Hankey did a lot of this work. And so then we used standard factoring approaches to estimate the AADTs on every mile of trail, and then also from that, the miles traveled. And so the reason we could do that is that the network itself was a select type of facility and it was small, and we had pretty good confidence in, because we had continuous counts at 6 sites and the patterns were the same, and we had a minimum of 7 to 10 days at every other site. We had pretty good confidence in our extrapolations using standard factoring approaches. There's not enough there aren't enough historically permanent counters within the city of Minneapolis, nor longer term short duration counts to do that same type of extrapolation, say for the city arterial and collector network. So we tried a different approach there where, based on the 2-hour counts, we've done direct demand models where we correlated volumes with adjacent adjacent land use, elements of built form, and transportation infrastructure. And so from using that, we've produced volume estimates for every city block in Minneapolis. Those aren't as good as estimates produced with factoring approaches, because the factoring data are better than the correlation we can get, but the models themselves are fairly good, and I think that they're a way to systematically take into consideration the effect of built environment and other factors on volumes. With respect to Michael's challenge at MnDOT, the challenge in reproducing the MnDOT AADT maps that enable them to do the VMT, I think it's just a question of coverage and time. And I think that where MnDOT is they have a number of sites. They're beginning to produce day-of-year factors for people who are doing short duration counts, so they can begin to get approximations, but those are going to be more site-specific rather than network-wide. And I think that, for example, if Simon's, Simon, there are some 700 signalized intersections in Minneapolis?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you get that number of continuous counts, and those can be paired with some enduring counts, I think you'll be in a better position to begin getting at more network level measures. But I think that's going to be a few years coming yet.
All right, let's see if we can get 1 or 2 more questions in. Bonnie Sherman with TxDOT, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you if you want to ask yours.
Okay. I just had a question for Michael about the loan program, and if MnDOT requires their loaned equipment to be used on state roads, or if they can be used on local facilities, trails, if there are any restrictions or expectations.
Yeah. There's really no restrictions. So that's the way we set it up. We bought the equipment with research dollars. We want to make it as easy as possible for all of our partners to collect information, and so we just they let us know what their idea is for where they're going to put it, what their need is for collecting data, and then I guess that's pretty much it. Just return it when they're done.
Do you loan them just 2 at a time, or do you loan them the whole package of 8 or a whole 16 set?
Yeah, so there's 8 sets of 2, and there's 1 set per MnDOT district, so they're pretty spread apart. And an interested party would just contact the nearest host to them, and then they would get a Rubbermaid tote, several gallon tote with the 2 counters and all the other additional equipment needed in it to use for their 9 days or so, and then they return it when they're done.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
We have a couple more questions from subcommittee members, but I think we've reached our time. Sirisha, do you want to go ahead and close us out?
Sure. We'd like to thank everybody for participating in the great conversation today, and we'd like to especially thank our presenters, Simon and Michael. Also, a big thank you to Maya Lee with TRB for all her assistance today. And we ask that you be on the lookout for announcements about future conversations in 2019. If you'd like to help us guide the series or get involved in other ways, we ask that you come to our subcommittee meeting at the annual meeting of the Transportation Research Board in Washington, D.C. And our meeting is on Wednesday, January 16th from 12:15 to 2:15 p.m. You can find the recordings of our conversations online at the link that's up on the slide. And if you have any other questions or would like to suggest potential topics, please let us know. Thanks again for tuning in, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Unmuted.
Thanks, Sirisha.